When billionaire father Damian Vasconcelos saw nurse Isabel Duarte feeding his blind son with the tenderness he couldn't provide, neither of them knew this moment would unravel a conspiracy that reached into the darkest corners of corporate power. The fluorescent lights of Santa Helena Hospital's pediatric wing cast their familiar harsh glow as Isabel adjusted the small silver cross necklace at her throat, a habit she'd developed during her most difficult cases. Room 314 had become her second home over the past week, ever since 8-year-old Gabriel Vasconcelos arrived with respiratory complications that seemed far too severe for a routine breathing issue. Isabel moved through her evening rounds with practiced efficiency, but her steps always slowed when she reached Gabriel's door. The boy sat propped against starched white pillows, his unseeing eyes fixed somewhere beyond the window where city lights painted shadows he would never perceive. His small hands traced the edges of his dinner tray with careful precision, mapping a world he navigated entirely through touch and sound. "I can't find the spoon, Miss Isabel," Gabriel whispered, his voice carrying the careful politeness of a child who'd learned early not to ask for too much. "It's right here, sweetheart." Isabel's voice carried none of the clinical distance her supervisors recommended. She guided his fingers to the utensil, then settled into the bedside chair that had become her unofficial post. "Your father should be here soon for visiting hours." Gabriel's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "He's very busy with important meetings." Isabel had heard this explanation 3 nights in a row. The boy spoke of his father with the rehearsed respect of someone reciting lines, but she'd noticed how his shoulders relaxed only when Damian Vasconcelos wasn't in the room. The few times the billionaire had visited, he'd stood near the door like a stranger paying respects, never sitting, never touching his son, except for brief, obligatory contact. "Would you like me to help with dinner?" Isabel asked, though she already knew the answer. Gabriel's face brightened with genuine relief. As she lifted the spoon, Isabel's mind wandered to Marcus, another 8-year-old she'd cared for 2 years ago. Marcus, whose bruises she'd documented carefully, whose frightened whispers she'd reported through proper channels, whose case had been closed with bureaucratic efficiency while he returned to the very home that had broken his ribs. The silver cross felt heavier against her throat as she remembered the newspaper article months later. Marcus hadn't survived his second accident. "The applesauce tastes different here," Gabriel observed, bringing her back to the present. "Hospital food often does, but this is from the children's menu. They try to make it better." Isabel watched his face as he ate, noting the careful way he chewed, as if even swallowing required conscious effort. His medical chart listed respiratory complications, but she'd observed episodes that seemed more neurological than pulmonary. Through the doorway, she caught sight of a familiar silhouette. Damian Vasconcelos moved through hospital corridors like he owned them, which, given his family's substantial donations, wasn't far from truth. His tailored charcoal suit and Italian leather shoes belonged to boardrooms and charity galas, not antiseptic hallways that smelled of hope and grief in equal measure. Gabriel's posture shifted the moment his father's presence filled the doorway. The boy's easy breathing became measured, controlled, as if demonstrating proper lung function was another expectation to meet. "Gabriel." Damian's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to being heard the first time. "How are you feeling this evening?" "Better, sir. The nurses have been very kind." "Sir." Isabel had never heard a child address their parent so formally. She stood to leave, but Damian's sharp gaze fixed on her position beside his son's bed, on the gentle way she'd been guiding Gabriel's hand to his water glass. "Nurse." He paused, consulting the badge clipped to her scrubs. "Duarte, how long have you been assigned to my son's care?" "Since his admission 5 days ago, Mr. Vasconcelos." Isabel kept her voice professionally neutral, but something in his tone raised defenses she didn't fully understand. "Gabriel has been a wonderful patient." "Has he?" Damian stepped closer to the bed and Isabel noticed Gabriel's slight flinch. "I trust you're following hospital protocol regarding patient interaction?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. Isabel touched her silver cross instinctively, feeling the familiar weight of being judged for caring too much. "Of course, sir. I provide the care outlined in Gabriel's treatment plan, which includes..." His dark eyes remained fixed on her face, searching for something she couldn't identify. "Respiratory monitoring, medication administration, nutritional assistance when needed." "When needed." He repeated the phrase as if it contained hidden meaning. "And you determine what's needed?" Gabriel's small voice cut through the tension. Miss Isabel helps me eat when my hands shake. Sometimes they shake. Damien's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. For a moment, something flickered across his features. Pain, perhaps, or recognition of a truth he'd been avoiding. But it vanished so quickly, Isabel wondered if she'd imagined it. I see. He straightened his cufflinks, a gesture that seemed more nervous habit than conscious adjustment. Well, I'm sure you have other patients requiring attention. It was a dismissal wrapped in polite suggestion. Isabel gathered the dinner tray but paused at the foot of Gabriel's bed. I'll check on you before my shift ends, okay? Gabriel nodded eagerly, then caught himself and glanced toward his father. If it's not too much trouble. It's never too much trouble, Isabel replied, meeting Damien's gaze directly before leaving the room. As she walked away, she heard Gabriel's careful voice. She's nice, isn't she, father? The response, if any, was too quiet to catch. But Isabel carried the weight of that unfinished conversation and the strange certainty that something vital remained unspoken in room 314. 3 more days passed in the careful rhythm that defined Isabel's relationship with Gabriel Vasconcelos. Morning medications at 7, breathing treatments at 10 and 2, and dinner assistance that had become the highlight of both their days. The silver cross at her throat caught the light differently each time she bent to help him navigate his meals, and she'd begun to notice how Gabriel's fingers would trace his own small pendant, a simple gold cross that seemed too mature for an 8-year-old's taste. My grandmother gave me this, Gabriel explained during their Tuesday evening routine, his fingers finding the necklace as if seeking comfort. She said it would keep me safe. Isabel's hand moved instinctively to her own cross. It's beautiful. She must have loved you very much. She did. Before... Gabriel's voice trailed off, but the unfinished sentence hung between them like morning mist. Isabel had learned not to push when Gabriel reached these conversational cliff edges. The boy carried secrets in the careful spaces between his words. Dr. Patricia Santos appeared in the doorway, her warm smile a welcome contrast to the clinical efficiency that defined most interactions at Santa Helena Hospital. Patricia had been Isabel's closest friend since nursing school, and the only colleague who understood why Isabel couldn't maintain professional distance from cases like Gabriel's. How's our patient this evening? Patricia asked, though her concerned glance toward Isabel suggested deeper questions. Better today, Gabriel replied with automatic politeness. My breathing has improved significantly. Patricia approached the bed with the easy manner that made her popular among young patients. That's wonderful news. Your father must be relieved. Gabriel's smile faltered. He's attending an important business dinner tonight. International investors, I believe. Isabel exchanged a look with Patricia. 5 consecutive evenings, and Damien Vasconcelos had managed to visit his son exactly twice, both times for less than 15 minutes. The man's absence spoke louder than his rare appearances, but Gabriel defended it with the loyalty of a child who'd learned that disappointment was safer than hope. Well, that means we get extra time together, Isabel said, settling into her familiar chair. Have you been practicing the breathing exercises? Gabriel nodded eagerly. Though sometimes they make me dizzy, is that normal? Patricia moved closer, her expression shifting to professional concern. What kind of dizzy, sweetheart? Like the room is spinning or more like you can't catch your breath? Both sometimes, especially when I try to remember. Gabriel paused, his unseeing eyes focusing on something beyond their perception. When I try to remember the accident, Isabel's attention sharpened. Gabriel rarely mentioned the car accident that had caused his blindness 6 months earlier. According to his medical records, he'd been a passenger in a vehicle that struck a concrete barrier during a routine family outing. The impact had caused traumatic brain injury resulting in cortical blindness, damage to the visual processing areas rather than his eyes themselves. Do you remember much about that day? Patricia asked gently. Gabriel's fingers found his cross again. Pieces. We were driving to see grandmother's grave for her birthday. Father was upset about something. There was a phone call and then... He shrugged with the studied carelessness of someone who'd told this story before. Then I woke up here and everything was dark. Isabel felt the familiar chill that preceded her worst hunches. Something about Gabriel's account felt rehearsed, like lines learned for a performance he didn't fully understand. She'd developed an instinct for incomplete truths during her years caring for vulnerable children, and Gabriel's careful recitation triggered every warning signal. Your father was driving, she asked, keeping her tone conversational. No, Miguel was. Our driver. He was hurt too, but not as badly. Gabriel's voice carried practiced matter-of-factness. Father said Miguel felt terrible about the accident. That's why we don't talk about it much. It makes everyone sad. Patricia caught Isabel's eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. They'd worked together long enough to communicate without words, and Patricia had clearly noticed the same inconsistencies that troubled Isabel. After Gabriel finished his dinner and settled for evening rest, Patricia lingered in the hallway outside his room. "Walk with me," she said quietly. They moved toward the nurses' station, where the evening shift bustled with controlled efficiency. Isabel had always found comfort in hospital rhythms, the predictable chaos of healing, the shared purpose that united strangers in scrubs. But tonight, routine felt like a facade concealing deeper currents. "Something doesn't add up," Patricia said once they were beyond earshot. "I've been reviewing Gabriel's case files, and the initial trauma assessment mentions neurological damage consistent with severe impact, but..." Patricia pulled out a tablet and scrolled through digital records. "Look at this." The emergency room noted unusual scarring patterns on Gabriel's scalp, pre-existing scarring. Isabel studied the clinical photographs Patricia showed her. Gabriel's head injury from the accident was clearly documented, but there were indeed older scars partially hidden by his hair, thin lines that suggested previous trauma. "Could be from childhood accidents," Isabel said, though something in her chest tightened with familiar dread. "Could be." But combined with his behavioral patterns, the way he flinches from sudden movements, how he addresses his father like he's reporting to a superior officer, Patricia's voice dropped to a whisper. "Isabel, I think there's more to Gabriel's story than anyone's saying." Isabel thought of Marcus again. The missed signs, the bureaucratic walls that protected powerful families from uncomfortable questions, the price children paid for adult silence. Her silver cross seemed to pulse against her throat like a heartbeat. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that maybe Gabriel's blindness wasn't caused by a simple car accident, and maybe his father's distance isn't grief. Maybe it's guilt." Through the windows of the nurses' station, Isabel could see the city lights that Gabriel would never perceive. Somewhere in that glittering expanse, Damien Vasconcelos was conducting business, while his son navigated darkness alone. But what if the darkness was deeper than anyone realized? What if Gabriel's blindness was just the visible consequence of invisible cruelties? Isabel touched her cross and made a silent promise to the boy in room 314. This time, she wouldn't let the truth disappear into bureaucratic files and polite silences. This time, she would dig until she found answers, no matter how uncomfortable they might prove. Thursday evening brought unexpected rain to the city, and with it, the sound that always seemed to comfort Gabriel most. Isabel found him sitting up in bed, face turned toward the window, where droplets traced irregular patterns down glass he couldn't see, but could hear with perfect clarity. "It sounds different when it hits the hospital windows," Gabriel observed as she entered with his dinner tray. "Sharper than at home. Father says it's because the glass is thicker here." Isabel paused in arranging his meal, struck by the casual mention of his father's observation. "Your father talks to you about the rain?" "Sometimes. When we're alone, he's..." Gabriel hesitated, searching for words. "Different. Quieter. Like he's listening for something he lost." The comment lingered in the air as Isabel helped Gabriel navigate his dinner. She'd begun to recognize patterns in their conversations, moments when the boy's careful composure would crack, revealing glimpses of a relationship far more complex than the cold interactions she'd witnessed. "Gabriel," she said gently, "the night of your accident, do you remember what your father was upset about? You mentioned he'd received a phone call." Gabriel's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. For a long moment, the only sound was rain against windows and the distant hum of hospital equipment. "He was angry about work," Gabriel finally replied. "Something about cars. He kept saying, they can't prove anything, and the recall would destroy everything." The boy's voice took on the precise cadence of quotation, as if he'd memorized his father's words without understanding their meaning. Isabel's breath caught. The word recall sent a chill through her that had nothing to do with the weather outside. She forced her voice to remain steady. "Do you remember anything else about the conversation?" "He said someone named Rodriguez was asking too many questions. That person was going to ruin us." Gabriel's fingers found his cross again. "I didn't understand why father was so worried. Rodriguez sounded like a nice name." The dinner tray suddenly felt heavy in Isabel's hands. Rodriguez. She'd heard that name before but couldn't place where. Something official, something connected to automotive safety reports. Her mind raced through half-remembered news stories about corporate scandals and suppressed investigations. "Sweetheart, you mentioned Miguel was your driver. Had he worked for your family long?" 3 years. He has a daughter my age, Sophia. She's in my class at school, but she's been absent since... Gabriel's voice trailed off. "Since the accident. Father says Miguel's family moved away for a fresh start." Isabel's professional instinct screamed warnings. Families didn't simply disappear after accidents unless they had compelling reasons, or unless someone gave them compelling reasons to leave. "Gabriel, I need to step out for a moment. Will you be all right?" Gabriel nodded, but his expression had grown subdued, as if their conversation had stirred memories he'd been trained to avoid. Isabel found Patricia at the nurse's station, updating patient charts with mechanical precision that suggested her mind was elsewhere. "I need access to the computer terminals," Isabel said without preamble. Patricia looked up, immediately alert. "What kind of access?" "The kind that lets me search automotive safety databases." Isabel's voice carried an urgency she couldn't suppress. "Gabriel just told me something about a recall, something his father was discussing the night of the accident." Patricia's eyes widened. "Isabel, you can't be serious. Hacking into federal databases? I'm not talking about hacking. I'm talking about public records. Safety recalls are published information." Isabel was already moving toward the computer station. "I need to know what Damian Vasconcelos might have been trying to hide." The hospital's internet connection felt painfully slow as Isabel navigated to the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration website. Her fingers flew over the keyboard, searching for any mentions of Vasconcelos Industries or its subsidiary companies. What she found made her stomach clench with recognition. "Patricia, look at this." Isabel's voice was barely above a whisper. "Vasconcelos Industries, subsidiary Vasco Auto Luxury Vehicles. Investigation opened 8 months ago into brake system failures in their high-end sedan line." Patricia leaned over her shoulder, reading the official report. "Preliminary findings suggest possible defects in brake fluid systems, leading to sudden failure at high speeds. Investigation suspended pending..." Her voice trailed off. "Isabel, this is dated 2 weeks before Gabriel's accident." Isabel scrolled down to find more disturbing details. The investigation had been led by safety engineer Carmen Rodriguez, who documented 17 near misses and 3 serious accidents involving Vasco Auto vehicles. All had involved brake failures under specific conditions, sudden stops, high-stress situations, precisely the circumstances that might occur during an emotional phone conversation. "The investigation was suspended," Isabel read aloud. "Rodriguez transferred to a different department, no recall issued." She looked up at Patricia with dawning horror. What if Gabriel's accident wasn't an accident? What if Damian Vasconcelos knew about the brake defects and chose to suppress the recall to protect his business interests? But that would mean... Patricia's face paled. That would mean he's directly responsible for his son's blindness. Isabel thought of Gabriel's careful words, his description of his father's anger about recalls and investigations. The boy had been an inadvertent witness to conversations he didn't understand. Conversations that might prove his father had knowingly allowed dangerous vehicles to remain on the road. "It would mean more than that," Isabel said quietly. "If Gabriel was in one of those cars, if Damian knew about the defects..." She couldn't finish the sentence, but the implications hung between them like a curse. The rain outside had intensified, matching the storm building in Isabel's chest. She printed the safety reports and tucked them into her pocket, the pages feeling like evidence in a case that was just beginning to unfold. When she returned to Gabriel's room, she found the boy lying very still, his face turned toward the ceiling. "Miss Isabel," he said without turning toward her voice, "do you think some secrets are too big to keep hidden?" Isabel sat down beside his bed, her hand finding his small one in the darkness he lived within. "I think the biggest secrets have a way of coming to light, sweetheart. Truth has its own gravity. It pulls everything toward it eventually." Gabriel squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "Even if the truth hurts people you love?" Isabel thought of the documents in her pocket, of the choice now facing her. Professional safety versus moral imperative, bureaucratic protocol versus a child's right to justice. "Sometimes the truth hurts at first," she said, "but lies hurt longer. Outside, thunder rolled across the city like a promise of storms to come. Friday morning arrived with deceptive calm, sunlight streaming through Gabriel's window as if the previous night's storm had washed the world clean. But Isabel carried the printed safety reports in her scrub pocket like burning coals, their implications growing heavier with each passing hour. Gabriel seemed more alert than usual, his breakfast routine accompanied by unusual chatter about dreams he couldn't quite remember. "I keep hearing voices in my sleep," he confided as Isabel helped him with his morning medications. "Father's voice, but younger somehow, like he's talking to someone I can't see." "Dreams can be strange," Isabel replied, though something in Gabriel's description made her pulse quicken. Traumatic memories sometimes surfaced in fragments, especially in children whose minds were still processing incomprehensible events. At 10:30, she was adjusting Gabriel's IV when Damien Vasconcelos appeared in the doorway. Unlike his previous visits, he didn't hover near the entrance but stepped fully into the room, his presence immediately commanding attention. Today he wore a navy suit that probably cost more than Isabel's monthly salary, and his dark eyes carried an intensity that made her instinctively protective. "Gabriel, how are you feeling this morning?" Damien's voice held warmth that seemed forced, like an actor playing a role he'd forgotten how to inhabit naturally. "Much better, Father. Miss Isabel says my breathing has improved significantly." Gabriel's response carried the same careful formality Isabel had noticed before, but now she heard something else underneath, a subtle tension that suggested the boy was also performing. "Excellent. Dr. Santos mentioned you might be ready for discharge soon." Damien's gaze shifted to Isabel with sharp assessment. "I trust Nurse Duarte has been appropriate in her care." The question carried undertones Isabel couldn't ignore. "Gabriel has been an exceptional patient, Mr. Vasconcelos. We've all enjoyed caring for him." "I'm sure you have." Something in his tone made Isabel's spine stiffen. "Though I understand you've been spending considerable time with my son, above and beyond typical nursing duties." Isabel felt the weight of the safety reports in her pocket like an accusation. Did he know about her research? Had someone reported her computer activity? "I believe in providing comprehensive care to all our pediatric patients, sir." Comprehensive. Damien repeated the word with the same inflection he'd used for "when needed" during their first encounter. "And what exactly does comprehensive care entail, in your professional opinion?" Gabriel's small voice cut through the adult's verbal sparring. "Miss Isabel helps me remember things, Father. Good things like how grandmother used to read to me." Damien's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. "Your grandmother read to you in Portuguese, Gabriel. I doubt Nurse Duarte is qualified to continue that particular tradition." The dismissal stung more than it should have, but Isabel recognized the tactic, diminishment disguised as reasonable concern. She'd seen it before from parents who viewed caregivers as servants rather than advocates. "Actually, I studied Portuguese in college," Isabel replied evenly. "Gabriel and I have been practicing some of his grandmother's favorite stories." It was a small lie, but it served its purpose. Damien's carefully controlled mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something that looked like panic before settling back into cold authority. "How thoughtful." He straightened his cufflinks in that nervous gesture Isabel had noticed before. "Though I think it's time we focused on Gabriel's transition home rather than encouraging him to dwell on the past." "The past can be important for healing," Isabel said, her fingers brushing against the documents in her pocket. "Especially when children have experienced trauma." "Trauma?" Damien's voice took on a dangerous edge. "Are you suggesting Gabriel has been traumatized by something other than his accident, Nurse Duarte?" The room fell silent, except for the steady beep of Gabriel's monitors. Isabel realized she'd stepped onto dangerous ground, but the boy's safety, and the safety of other potential victims, demanded courage she'd failed to show with Marcus. "I'm suggesting that children benefit from having trusted adults who listen to their concerns," she replied carefully. "Gabriel has mentioned some interesting details about the night of his accident." Damien went very still. "Has he?" Gabriel, sensing the shift in atmosphere, reached for his cross with trembling fingers. "Miss Isabel, maybe we shouldn't—" "It's all right, sweetheart," Isabel said gently, though her heart was racing. "Your father deserves to know that you're processing your memories in healthy ways." "And what memories might those be?" Damien's question was directed at Isabel, but his eyes never left his son's face. Isabel felt the moment crystallize around her, the choice between professional safety and moral imperative, between protecting herself and protecting Gabriel. The silver cross at her throat seemed to pulse with warmth. "Gabriel remembers the phone call," she said quietly. "The conversation about recalls, about someone named Rodriguez asking too many questions." Damien's face went completely white. For several seconds, the only sound was Gabriel's increasingly rapid breathing. "Gabriel," Damien said finally, his voice carefully controlled, "you were unconscious after the accident. Sometimes children create false memories to fill in gaps they don't understand. But Father, you remember what your mind wants you to remember." Damien's interruption was sharp enough to make Gabriel flinch. "Trauma affects memory, doesn't it, Nurse Duarte?" Isabel recognized the trap. Agree, and she'd be validating his dismissal of Gabriel's recollections. Disagree, and she'd be challenging his parental authority without concrete evidence. "Children's memories can be remarkably accurate about emotional events," she said carefully, "especially conversations that frighten them." Damien stepped closer to Gabriel's bed, and Isabel noticed her patient's breathing becoming more labored, not from respiratory distress, but from anxiety. "I think we've discussed Gabriel's recovery quite enough," Damien said, his tone carrying unmistakable finality. "In fact, I think it's time we considered transferring his care to a different facility, one with staff who understand appropriate boundaries." The threat was clear. Isabel felt the safety reports burning in her pocket, knowing she had one chance to make him understand the stakes. "Mr. Vasconcelos," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is face uncomfortable truths, for their child's sake." Damien's eyes met hers with laser intensity. "And sometimes, Nurse Duarte, the most professional thing a caregiver can do is remember their place." As he left the room, Isabel realized the battle lines had been drawn. Gabriel reached for her hand in the sudden quiet, his small fingers trembling. "Miss Isabel," he whispered, "did I say something wrong?" Isabel squeezed his hand gently, her mind already racing toward the next move in a game where the stakes were nothing less than a child's future. "No, sweetheart," she said. "You said something true, and sometimes the truth makes people afraid." The afternoon shift brought an unexpected visit from hospital administrator Margaret Hendricks, whose presence in the pediatric ward usually signaled either celebration or catastrophe. Isabel found her waiting by the nurses' station with the kind of expression that suggested this wasn't a social call. "Nurse Duarte, we need to discuss your patient interaction protocols." Hendrix's voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to uncomfortable conversations. "Specifically, your care of Gabriel Vasconcelos." Isabel's stomach dropped, but she kept her voice steady. "Is there a concern about Gabriel's medical care?" "The concern is about boundaries." Hendricks gestured toward her office with the kind of polite command that wasn't really optional. "Mr. Vasconcelos has expressed some reservations about the nature of your interactions with his son." The office felt smaller than usual as Isabel settled into the chair across from Hendricks' desk. Through the window, she could see the city sprawling beyond the hospital grounds, thousands of people going about their lives, while Gabriel lay in room 314, carrying secrets that could destroy his father's empire and validate his own suffering. "Mr. Vasconcelos believes you've been encouraging Gabriel to dwell on traumatic memories," Hendricks continued. "He's concerned that your well-intentioned care might be hampering his son's psychological recovery." Isabel felt the safety reports in her pocket, like evidence at a trial where she was both prosecutor and defendant. Gabriel benefits from having someone listen to his concerns. That's standard trauma-informed care. "Standard care doesn't typically involve discussing patient memories outside their treatment team," Hendricks replied. "Mr. Vasconcelos mentioned that you've been asking Gabriel about the night of his accident." The accusation hung between them like a sword. Isabel realized that Damien had moved quickly to control the narrative, framing her investigation as unprofessional meddling rather than legitimate concern. "Children often need to process traumatic events through conversation," Isabel said carefully. "Gabriel mentioned some details that seemed important for his healing." "Details about what specifically?" Isabel felt the moment balanced on a knife's edge. She could retreat into professional platitudes, apologize for overstepping boundaries, and return to the safe routine of medical tasks. Or she could trust her instincts and fight for a child who had no one else willing to advocate for him. Details that suggest his accident might not have been as straightforward as reported. Hendricks leaned back in her chair, her expression shifting from administrative annoyance to genuine concern. "Isabel, what are you suggesting?" Isabel pulled the printed safety reports from her pocket, her hand steadier than she'd expected. "I'm suggesting that Gabriel Vasconcelos was injured in a vehicle with known brake defects that his father chose not to recall." The documents seemed to take on weight as she placed them on Hendrix's desk. The administrator read through them with growing dismay, her professional composure cracking with each page. "These reports," Hendrix's voice trailed off. "Isabel, this suggests criminal negligence. It suggests that Damien Vasconcelos prioritized corporate profits over public safety, including the safety of his own son." Isabel's voice carried conviction that surprised her. Gabriel remembers conversations about recalls and investigations. He was an inadvertent witness to his father's decision to suppress safety information. Hendrix studied the documents for several long minutes, the silence broken only by the distant sounds of hospital life continuing around them. When she finally looked up, her expression was grave. "These are serious allegations, Isabel. The kind that destroy careers if they're wrong and destroy lives if they're right." "I know." Isabel thought of Gabriel's careful formality around his father, his trembling hands, the way he flinched from sudden movements. "But Gabriel deserves someone willing to ask uncomfortable questions. And you're prepared for the consequences of asking them." Isabel felt the weight of her choice settling around her like armor. She thought of Marcus, of the bureaucratic walls that had protected his abusers, of her failure to push harder when a child's safety hung in the balance. "I'm more prepared for the consequences of not asking them." Hendrix nodded slowly. "All right, but we need to handle this properly. I'm going to contact Child Protective Services and request a formal investigation. In the meantime, you'll need to document everything, every conversation, every observation, every detail that supports your concerns." Relief flooded through Isabel like cool water. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Damien Vasconcelos is one of our largest benefactors. The hospital board won't appreciate accusations that could jeopardize that relationship, and if you're wrong about this, I understand the risks. I hope you do." Hendrix gathered the safety reports with careful precision, because once we start this process, there's no going back. Gabriel will be placed under protective observation, which means social workers, investigators, and media attention that could traumatize him further. Isabel thought of Gabriel's small hand in hers, his whispered fears and careful secrets. He's already traumatized. The question is whether we're going to help him heal or continue pretending everything's normal. "All right." Hendrix stood, her decision made. "I'll make the calls. But Isabel, you need to be very careful how you interact with both Gabriel and his father from this point forward. Document everything. Say nothing that isn't medically necessary, and remember that you're now a potential witness in a criminal investigation." As Isabel walked back to the pediatric ward, she felt the familiar weight of her silver cross against her throat. The afternoon sun streamed through hospital windows, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air like secrets finally given permission to be seen. In room 314, Gabriel was sitting up in bed, his unseeing eyes turned toward the door, as if he'd been listening for her return. "Miss Isabel," he said quietly, "something's changed, hasn't it?" Isabel sat down beside his bed, taking his small hand in hers. "Yes, sweetheart, something has changed." "Will it hurt?" Isabel thought of the investigation to come, the questions Gabriel would face, the potential destruction of the only family he'd ever known. But she also thought of the other children who might be saved by the truth, and the possibility that Gabriel might finally find peace in having his reality acknowledged. "Truth sometimes hurts before it heals," she said gently, "but lies hurt longer." Gabriel squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "Then I'm ready for the truth." Outside, the city continued its rhythm of ordinary days. But in room 314, everything had changed. The point of no return had been crossed, and there was only the uncertain road ahead, toward justice, toward healing, or toward consequences none of them could yet imagine. The Child Protective Services investigation began with deceptive quiet. Social worker Elena Martinez arrived Monday morning with the kind of gentle professionalism that disguised steel determination. Isabel watched from the nurse's station as Elena introduced herself to Gabriel, noting how the boy's posture immediately shifted into the careful politeness he reserved for authority figures. "I'm here to make sure you're safe and happy," Elena explained, settling into the chair Isabel had claimed as her own. Sometimes when children are hurt, we need to ask some questions to understand what happened. Gabriel's fingers found his cross. I'm safe here. Miss Isabel takes very good care of me. I'm sure she does, but I'd like to hear about your life before you came to the hospital. Can you tell me about your home? Isabel busied herself with nearby tasks, close enough to observe but trying not to intrude. Gabriel's responses were measured, careful, a child who'd learned that the wrong answer could bring consequences he didn't fully understand. Father works very hard. We have a big house with a garden I used to play in. Gabriel's voice carried practiced normalcy. Miguel used to drive me to school before I couldn't see anymore. Tell me about Miguel, Elena said gently. You miss him. For the first time, Gabriel's composure cracked slightly. Miguel was kind. He taught me Spanish words and let me help wash the car. His daughter Sofia was my friend, but she doesn't visit anymore. Elena made notes with careful discretion. Do you know why Sofia's family moved away? Father says they needed a fresh start after the accident, because Miguel felt responsible. Gabriel's response sounded memorized, like lines from a play he'd rehearsed without understanding the plot. Isabel felt someone approach and turned to find Patricia at her elbow, carrying a tablet with an expression of barely contained excitement. I found something, Patricia whispered, guiding Isabel toward a quiet corner. I couldn't sleep last night, so I kept digging into those safety reports. Look at this. The tablet displayed a scanned newspaper article from 6 months earlier. Local family relocated after vehicle accident testimony. Isabel's breath caught as she read the details. Miguel Rodriguez, Gabriel's former driver, had initially provided witness testimony suggesting brake failure in the Vasconcelos vehicle, but within a week, he'd changed his statement to accept full responsibility for the accident, citing distraction and speed as primary factors. That's not the interesting part, Patricia continued, scrolling to a related article. 3 weeks later, Miguel's daughter Sofia was enrolled in a prestigious private school in Nevada, full scholarship, housing included. For a driver's daughter, that's unusual. Isabel studied the timeline with growing certainty. Damien bought his silence and relocated the family to ensure it stayed bought. Patricia's voice carried grim satisfaction. But here's what he couldn't control. Miguel's ex-wife, Carmen Rodriguez. The name hit Isabel like electricity. Carmen Rodriguez, the safety engineer who was investigating the brake defects. Miguel's ex-wife, who happened to have inside access to both the technical investigation and her daughter's traumatic witness account of the accident. Patricia pulled up another document. Carmen Rodriguez now works for a whistleblower protection advocacy group in California, and according to this employment record, she's been building a federal case against Vasco Auto for 18 months. Isabel felt pieces clicking together like puzzle fragments, finding their rightful places. Gabriel's accident hadn't just been covered up, it had been the catalyst for a much larger investigation that Damien couldn't suppress through financial pressure alone. We need to contact her, Isabel said. Already did. Patricia's smile held triumph and apprehension in equal measure. She's flying in tomorrow. Isabel, she has documentation that could put Damien Vasconcelos in federal prison, but she needs Gabriel's testimony to corroborate the timeline. Isabel glanced back toward Gabriel's room, where Eleanor was still conducting her interview with patient thoroughness. A traumatized 8-year-old's testimony against his father. That's exactly what Carmen Rodriguez has been waiting for. A witness who was actually in the car, who heard the conversations leading up to the accident. Patricia's voice dropped to an urgent whisper. Isabel, this case is bigger than one child's tragedy. There have been 17 accidents, 3 fatalities. Gabriel's testimony could save lives. But before Isabel could respond, she noticed a commotion near the elevator bank. Damien Vasconcelos was striding through the pediatric ward, flanked by 2 men in expensive suits, lawyers by the look of their briefcases and predatory confidence. We have a problem, Isabel murmured. Damien's voice carried clearly down the hallway as he addressed Hendricks, who had emerged from her office with obvious reluctance. I want to know who authorized this investigation into my family. My son has been through enough trauma without having social workers interrogating him. Mr. Vasconcelos, the investigation follows proper protocol when concerns are raised about a child's welfare, Hendricks replied, with professional calm that didn't quite hide her tension. Concerns raised by whom? One of the lawyers stepped forward with the smooth aggression of someone accustomed to intimidating opposition into submission. My client has every right to know who's making accusations against him. Isabel felt the familiar chill of institutional pressure closing ranks around power and money. She'd seen this before, the way wealth could transform victims into inconveniences and advocates into troublemakers. The investigation is confidential. Elena Martinez had appeared in Gabriel's doorway, her professional demeanor now carrying an edge of protective steel. But I can tell you that Gabriel is a very brave boy who deserves to have his voice heard. Damien's gaze shifted to Elena with laser focus. My son is a traumatized child whose memories have been influenced by well-meaning but misguided caregivers. He needs therapy, not interrogation. He needs truth, Isabel said, stepping forward before she could second-guess her courage. The hallway fell silent. Every eye turned to Isabel, Damien's with dangerous recognition, his lawyers with calculating assessment, Elena's with surprised support. "Nurse Duarte," Damien's voice carried soft menace, "I think you've said quite enough about my son's care. Actually, I don't think I've said nearly enough." Isabel's hand moved instinctively to her cross, drawing strength from its familiar weight. Gabriel remembers things, important things, and he deserves to have those memories treated with respect instead of dismissed as trauma-induced confusion. One of the lawyers leaned toward Damien and whispered urgently. Isabel caught fragments. "Cease and desist and defamation. Professional misconduct." "I think," Damien said finally, his voice carrying deadly calm, "that we should discuss Gabriel's immediate transfer to a more suitable facility, one with staff who understand appropriate boundaries." But Elena Martinez stepped fully into the hallway, her small frame radiating authority that seemed to surprise even the lawyers. "Gabriel Vasconcelos is now under protective custody pending investigation," she announced. "He cannot be transferred without court approval, and any attempts to interfere with this investigation will be reported to federal authorities." The words hung in the air like a declaration of war. Isabel watched Damien's carefully controlled mask slip for just a moment, revealing something that looked like genuine fear before snapping back into cold fury. "This isn't over," he said quietly, his gaze fixed on Isabel with promise of consequences she couldn't yet imagine. As the lawyers flanked Damien toward the elevator, Patricia moved closer to Isabel's side. "Carmen Rodriguez's flight lands at 6 tonight," she whispered. "By tomorrow morning, Gabriel won't be facing this alone." Isabel nodded, watching the elevator doors close on Damien's retreating figure. The battle was escalating, but for the first time since this began, she felt like they might actually have enough allies to fight it. In room 314, Gabriel was sitting very still, his unseeing eyes fixed on the doorway, as if he could sense the tension that had filled the hallway. "Miss Isabel," he called softly. "Are you still there?" "I'm here, sweetheart," she replied, moving to his bedside. "I'm right here." The voices were louder today, Gabriel said quietly. Father's voice and others. Angry voices. Isabel took his small hand in hers. "Sometimes, before things get better, they have to get louder first. But you're not alone in this anymore, Gabriel. You have people who believe you." Gabriel squeezed her fingers with surprising strength. "Will you still be here tomorrow?" Isabel thought of Carmen Rodriguez, of federal investigations and corporate conspiracies, of the uncertain road ahead that would demand more courage than she'd ever possessed. "I'll be here," she promised, "for as long as you need me." Carmen Rodriguez arrived at Santa Helena Hospital like a storm front moving across clear sky. Isabel recognized her immediately, mid-40s, steel-gray hair pulled back severely, eyes that carried the weight of professional battles fought in corporate boardrooms and federal courthouses. This was a woman who'd built her career on making the powerful uncomfortable. "You must be Nurse Duarte," Carmen said, her handshake firm and warm despite the gravity of her mission. "Thank you for reaching out. Miguel has been waiting years for someone to listen to Gabriel's side of the story." They gathered in Hendrik's office, Isabel, Carmen, Elena Martinez, and Patricia, while Gabriel slept under light sedation that would help him process the emotional intensity of recent days. The administration had cleared the meeting, understanding that cooperation with federal investigators was preferable to obstruction charges. Carmen opened her briefcase with practiced efficiency, spreading documents across the conference table like pieces of a puzzle that was finally ready to be solved. "Vasco Auto's brake defects weren't accidental," she began without preamble. "They were the result of cost-cutting measures that Damien Vasconcelos, personally approved 18 months before Gabriel's accident. Internal emails show he was aware of 17 incidents and chose to suppress recalls to protect a lucrative military contract. Isabel studied the documents with growing horror. Corporate memos discussing acceptable risk ratios, profit projections that weighed potential lawsuit settlements against recall costs, board meeting minutes where human lives were reduced to statistical probabilities. The military contract, Elena asked. How much was it worth? $2.7 billion over 5 years. Carmen's voice carried professional disgust. Damien calculated that recall costs would exceed potential lawsuit payouts. He gambled with public safety and won, until his son became one of the statistics. Patricia leaned forward, her medical training evident in her focused questions. The brake failures. What specific conditions triggered them? High-stress situations involving sudden emotional distraction combined with specific weather conditions. Rain, specifically. Carmen pulled out technical diagrams. The brake fluid system had a design flaw that caused vapor locks under precise circumstances. Miguel was driving through a rainstorm, while Damien was having an aggressive phone conversation about the investigation, threatening to expose the defects. Isabel felt the pieces clicking together with devastating clarity. Gabriel wasn't just a passenger in an accident. He was collateral damage in his father's corporate cover-up. Worse than that, Carmen's expression darkened. The phone call Gabriel remembers, Damien wasn't just discussing the investigation. He was actively threatening investigators, including me. Gabriel heard his father discussing ways to silence whistleblowers through legal pressure, financial incentives, and professional destruction. Elena made careful notes. And Miguel's family relocation? Miguel initially told the truth, that the brakes failed during Damien's phone call, that he heard Damien discussing suppressing safety information. Within a week, Miguel was offered a settlement that included his silence, relocation expenses, and a full scholarship for Sophia at an exclusive boarding school. Carmen's voice carried bitter recognition. Damien bought Miguel's cooperation by holding his daughter's future hostage. Isabel thought of Gabriel's careful words about Miguel feeling responsible, about Sophia's absence from his life. Even the boy's friendships had been casualties of his father's corporate machinations. But Miguel kept copies of everything, Carmen continued. Text messages from Damien's legal team, recording of their settlement conversation, documented proof that Damien knew about the brake defects and chose to suppress them. Miguel's been cooperating with federal investigators for months. What changed? Patricia asked. Why surface now? Carmen's expression softened slightly. Miguel's daughter Sophia has been having nightmares about the accident. She was on a video call with Gabriel when it happened. She heard everything, saw Gabriel's injuries, witnessed the immediate aftermath. The trauma has been destroying her. Miguel realized that silence wasn't protecting his family. It was enabling a system that could hurt other children. Isabel felt a chill of recognition. Sophia was a witness too. Sophia heard Damien's phone conversation through Gabriel's tablet. She can testify to what was said, corroborate Gabriel's memories, and provide independent verification of the timeline. Carmen gathered her documents with purposeful precision. Between Sophia's testimony, Miguel's documentation, and Gabriel's witness account, we have enough evidence to bring federal charges for criminal negligence, corporate fraud, and endangering public welfare. Elena looked troubled. That's a lot of pressure to put on traumatized children. The pressure is already there, Isabel said quietly. Gabriel's been carrying these secrets alone for months, thinking he's protecting his father, while simultaneously being isolated from his own reality. At least this way, his truth serves a purpose. Carmen nodded approvingly. Gabriel won't be alone in this. Sophia wants to tell her story. She sees it as helping her friend, and Miguel is prepared to face whatever consequences come from breaking his silence. What about Damien? Patricia asked. How do we expect him to react when he realizes the walls are closing in? Carmen's smile held no warmth. Damien Vasconcelos is about to discover that some things can't be bought, suppressed, or legally maneuvered around. Federal investigators don't negotiate with corporate criminals. Through the office windows, Isabel could see the city lights beginning to twinkle in the evening darkness. Somewhere in that urban expanse, Damien Vasconcelos was probably conducting business as usual, confident that his wealth and influence would protect him from consequences, as they always had. There's something else, Carmen said, her voice dropping to a more personal register. Miguel asked me to give Gabriel a message. He wants the boy to know that he never stopped caring about him, that leaving wasn't abandonment. It was the only way to eventually bring justice. Isabel thought of Gabriel's loneliness, his careful acceptance of adult decisions he couldn't understand. When do we tell him? Tomorrow morning. Sophia is flying in with her father. They both want to see Gabriel before the formal interviews begin. Carmen's expression grew gentle. I think Gabriel is about to discover that he has more people fighting for him than he ever imagined. As the meeting concluded, Isabel felt something shifting in her chest. Not just hope, but certainty. The machinery of justice was finally turning, and Gabriel would no longer carry his burden alone. Later that night, she sat beside Gabriel's bed in the quiet darkness, watching his peaceful sleep. His small hand still clutched his cross, but his breathing was steady and untroubled for the first time since she'd known him. Tomorrow would bring difficult questions and painful revelations, but it would also bring truth, allies, and the possibility that Gabriel might finally step out of his father's shadow and into a world where his voice mattered. The silver cross at Isabel's throat caught the soft light from the hallway, and she whispered a prayer for courage, not just for herself, but for a boy who was about to discover that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is tell the truth, even when it changes everything. The Vasconcelos Foundation Charity Gala was held in the grand ballroom of the Meridian Hotel, where crystal chandeliers cast diamond patterns across polished marble floors, and the city's elite gathered to celebrate philanthropy while networking for profit. Isabel stood near the entrance in a borrowed black dress, feeling like an imposter among women whose jewelry cost more than her annual salary. She hadn't planned to attend. The invitation had come from an unexpected source. Gabriel himself, who'd asked Elena Martinez to ensure Isabel could be present for what he called the night everything changes. The boy had spent the morning in interviews with federal investigators, his testimony corroborated by Sophia's brave account and Miguel's documented evidence. Now he insisted on confronting his father publicly in front of the community that had elevated Damian Vasconcelos to philanthropic sainthood. "You look nervous," Patricia observed, appearing at Isabel's elbow with 2 glasses of champagne. "Remember, we're not here to enjoy the party." Through the crowd, Isabel could see Damian on the main stage, resplendent in a custom tuxedo as he prepared to address the assembled donors. His smile held the polished warmth of someone who'd perfected the art of public charm, but Isabel noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes scanned the crowd with calculation rather than gratitude. "Ladies and gentlemen," Damian's voice carried easily through the ballroom's sophisticated sound system. "Tonight, we celebrate not just the Vasconcelos Foundation's achievements, but our community's commitment to healing children who've faced unimaginable challenges." The irony was suffocating. Isabel watched as Damian outlined the Foundation's work with pediatric trauma victims, his words carrying conviction that might have been genuine if she didn't know what his own son had endured. "Recent events have reminded me how precious and fragile childhood can be," Damian continued, his gaze finding Isabel in the crowd with laser precision. "How important it is to protect our children from those who would exploit their vulnerability for personal gain." The message was clear, a warning wrapped in philanthropic rhetoric. But Isabel felt strength flowing from an unexpected source. The small figure seated in a wheelchair near the stage's edge, Gabriel Vasconcelos in his first formal suit, his unseeing eyes fixed on his father's voice with an expression of heartbreaking determination. Elena Martinez sat beside Gabriel, her presence both protective and empowering. When she'd first suggested Gabriel attend the gala, Isabel had been appalled at the idea of subjecting him to such public exposure. But Gabriel had been resolute. He wanted to face his father in front of the people who admired him, wanted truth to emerge in the place where lies had been celebrated. "The Foundation's work becomes deeply personal," Damian was saying, "when tragedy strikes your own family. 6 months ago, my son Gabriel was injured in a car accident that cost him his sight. Through his courage and the dedication of medical professionals, he's taught me new lessons about resilience." Polite applause rippled through the crowd, but Isabel noticed several guests glancing toward Gabriel with expressions that seemed more curious than sympathetic. Word had begun to spread through the city's social circles, whispers about federal investigations, questions about the accident that had never quite added up. Gabriel's small voice cut through the applause with startling clarity. The boy had been fitted with a wireless microphone at Elena's suggestion, and his words carried to every corner of the ballroom. "Father, may I say something?" Damien's polished composure flickered for just a moment. The crowd turned toward Gabriel with interest, assuming they were about to witness a touching father-son moment that would cap the evening's emotional appeal. "Of course, Gabriel," Damien replied, though Isabel caught the warning in his voice. "Though perhaps we should save family conversations for—" "I remember the night I lost my sight," Gabriel interrupted, his young voice carrying surprising strength. "I remember the phone call you were having in the car." The ballroom fell silent with the sudden completeness that accompanies unexpected revelation. Isabel felt her heart hammering as Gabriel continued, his unseeing eyes still fixed on his father's location with uncanny precision. "You were talking about car problems that could hurt people, about someone named Rodriguez who was asking questions you didn't want answered." Gabriel's fingers found his cross, drawing strength from its familiar presence. "You said, they can't prove anything and the recall would destroy everything." Damien stepped away from the podium, his face cycling through emotions, shock, fury, and something that looked like genuine panic. "Gabriel, sweetheart, you're confused. The accident was traumatic and sometimes—" "I'm not confused anymore, Father." Gabriel's voice grew stronger with each word. "Miguel didn't cause our accident. The car's brakes failed because you knew they were broken and didn't fix them. Sophia heard it too. She was on video call with me when it happened." The crowd's murmur began as a whisper and built towards something approaching uproar. Isabel watched faces around the ballroom, confusion, disbelief, and dawning recognition that they were witnessing something far more significant than a charity gala's entertainment. Carmen Rodriguez appeared at the edge of the crowd, flanked by federal investigators whose presence transformed whispered gossip into stark reality. She moved through the guests with purposeful calm, her credentials already visible as she approached the stage. "Mr. Vasconcelos." Carmen's voice carried official authority that cut through crowd noise like a blade. "I'm Special Investigator Rodriguez with the Department of Transportation. We need to discuss Vasco Auto's suppressed safety recalls and their connection to 17 vehicle accidents, including the one that injured your son." Damien looked trapped between his son's public testimony and federal investigators closing in from multiple directions. The ballroom had become a courtroom, the gala guests an inadvertent jury witnessing the collapse of carefully constructed lies. "This is neither the time nor place," Damien began, but Gabriel's voice interrupted him once more. "When is the right time to tell the truth, Father? When is the right place to admit that you chose money over safety, that you chose protecting your business over protecting me?" Isabel felt tears streaming down her face as she watched Gabriel find his voice in front of hundreds of witnesses. The boy who'd whispered secrets in hospital darkness was claiming his truth in brilliant light, demanding accountability from the father who taught him to accept shadows as normal. The silver cross at Isabel's throat seemed to pulse with warmth as she realized this moment had been inevitable from the night she first fed Gabriel with gentle hands. Truth had its own gravity, as she'd told him, and tonight it was pulling everything into its orbit, lies, secrets, and the possibility of justice that had seemed impossible just days before. Damien stood frozen at the podium, his philanthropic mask finally slipping to reveal the man beneath, powerful, desperate, and completely unprepared for the courage of his own son. The Vasconcelos Foundation Charity Gala transformed from elegant celebration to public tribunal as Gabriel's voice cut through the crystal ballroom's polished atmosphere. "Father, I remember the phone call in the car," Gabriel said into his wireless microphone, his unseeing eyes fixed on Damien's location with heartbreaking precision. "You were talking about broken brakes that could hurt people, about stopping someone named Rodriguez from asking questions." The crowd fell silent as federal investigators flanked Carmen Rodriguez at the stage's edge. Damien stepped away from the podium, his philanthropic mask finally cracking. "Gabriel, you're confused." "I'm not confused anymore." Gabriel's voice grew stronger. "Sophia heard it too. She was on video call with me when our car's brakes failed because you knew they were broken and chose not to fix them." 10-year-old Sophia Rodriguez stepped forward with her father Miguel. "Mr. Vasconcelos was yelling about my mama asking too many questions," Sophia testified with devastating clarity. "He said he would destroy anyone who tried to hurt his company." Carmen Rodriguez produced federal documents, internal Vasco Auto emails showing Mr. Vasconcelos' knowledge of brake defects in 17 vehicles. He calculated that lawsuits would cost less than recalls. The ballroom erupted in whispers of shock and disgust. The city's elite watched their philanthropic hero exposed as a corporate criminal who'd endangered lives for profit. "Why didn't you just fix the cars, Father?" Gabriel asked with heartbreaking directness. "Why didn't you choose to keep people safe?" Damien's voice cracked. "Business decisions are complicated." "That hurt your own son?" Gabriel interrupted. "That hurt strangers whose lives mattered just as much as ours?" Carmen stepped forward with federal authority. "Damien Vasconcelos, you're under arrest for criminal negligence and corporate fraud." As agents escorted him away, Damien looked toward his son with something approaching regret. "Gabriel, I never meant for you to be hurt." Gabriel's response carried wisdom beyond his years. "But you knew other children would be hurt, Father. You chose your business over their safety. That's what I can't forgive." The words fell like judgment in the crystal ballroom, finalizing justice that no wealth could overturn. 6 months later, Isabel stood in Santa Helena Hospital's sunlit rehabilitation center, watching Gabriel read Braille stories to younger patients. His voice carried the same gentleness she remembered, but without the careful fear that once marked his every word. The silver cross at her throat caught morning light as she observed the transformation. Gabriel moved through his world with confidence that would have seemed impossible during those first dark nights in room 314. "The federal investigation concluded," Patricia Santos said, joining Isabel. "Damien received 12 years in prison. Vasco Auto paid $300 million in settlements." Gabriel approached with easy confidence, his white cane sweeping efficient arcs. "Miss Isabel, I have something to ask you." He produced a letter, fingers tracing Braille with practiced skill. "The Gabriel Vasconcelos Foundation for Child Advocacy needs a director, someone who taught me that caring isn't weakness, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to accept injustice." Isabel's heart quickened with recognition. "Would you become our director of child advocacy?" Gabriel continued. "Help make sure other children know they deserve to be heard and believed?" The offer felt like calling finally recognized. Her work protecting Gabriel had been just the beginning. Now they could shield other vulnerable children from institutional betrayal. "I would be honored, Gabriel." His face lit with joy that transformed clinical space into something sacred. "Then we start tomorrow." Carmen Rodriguez is helping us design protocols for child witness protection. Through rehabilitation center windows, Isabel could see the city where Damien had once wielded corrupt power. Now that same city hosted a foundation dedicated to ensuring children's voices could challenge adult failures without fear. Gabriel returned to his volunteers, helping a new patient navigate sudden blindness with patient guidance. His cross caught afternoon light as he offered the same tenderness Isabel had shown him during his darkest nights. Isabel realized their journey had come full circle. The boy who'd once whispered secrets in hospital darkness now spoke truth in sunlit rooms, transforming trauma into purpose that would protect other children. The Silver Cross, the same cross that gave her courage during those first uncertain nights, now reflected light, promising new beginnings. Gabriel had taught her that healing comes not from forgetting painful truths, but from using them to build something better. Somewhere in federal prison, Damien was learning that wealth meant nothing without moral courage his son had discovered in blindness. But here, Gabriel's legacy was already changing lives. The transformation was complete. Gabriel's evolution from victim to advocate, Isabel's growth from cautious caregiver to fierce protector of children's truth. Together, they would ensure no child faced institutional betrayal alone. In room 314, a new patient was learning that sight had many forms, guided by volunteers who understood that truth has its own gravity, pulling secrets into light where they finally serve healing instead of hiding harm. Share this story with someone who needs to know their voice matters. Sometimes the most important voices belong to those who seem powerless. But courage can emerge from darkness when someone offers gentle support and unwavering belief.